Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Late Night Brew, where we talk to brews first, then we get around to what we're supposed to at some point. Joining me once again for the next episode in this series is Joe Cirillo. Joe, welcome back, buddy.
Thank you once again. Glad to be here.
Now, before we dive into testing during tenant to tenant migrations, you're a seasoned vet. So, what brew are you having with me today?
Today, I just actually brewed my own iced tea. So, just
Ooh.
nothing too crazy. Just good old Lipton iced tea.
It's warming up, so
Yep.
I will soon myself have a stock of iced tea. I've actually got Schaffenhofer. It's a
Hmm.
Radler. It's a half beer, half grapefruit juice,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is actually quite delightful, and it's
Mm,
very it's not very high octane, so it's one of those that it's definitely just a good sipping. It tastes like you're drinking grapefruit juice, which
mm.
is both great and
Oh,
terrible.
yeah. Yeah. The first time I had a mixed beer and like lemonade was in Germany, actually in Munich. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, that's interesting. So it was actually pretty good. Yeah. Who
Yeah,
knew?
yeah, it's one of those lovely discoveries.
Hmm.
Now, getting into the thick of it, just trying to think of a terrible pulp pun, I just couldn't. Uh, how much of the migration process should be tested?
Yeah, and boy, that's a nebulous question for sure, because, of course, with any type of migration, you always want to plan, and then, of course, test. And so, as I would just say that if you can do as much testing as possible, that's always ideal, right? So
Right.
when you think about the workloads that are being migrated over, and what you can actually test, given the fact that sometimes in these types of migrations, you're actually going to move the brand with you, right? So you're
Yeah.
company.com and you're going to bring company.com. So, but you can't move that brand until the very end of the migration. So how do you test, strategically with that domain? Typically you cannot. So you have to just, from a testing perspective, use either a faux domain or the Microsoft domain, for testing things like email, right? Sending, receiving, so on and so forth. But you always want to test things within the framework of the migration tool. So you think, a lot of times the migration tooling will migrate permissions, for example, for Exchange or SharePoint, Teams, OneDrives. So you want to make sure that those permissions are being carried over, and so
Properly
you want to
lifted and
test.
shifted. Yeah.
Yep. So you definitely want to test all of the feature and functionality that the migration tool says it's going to be capable of. You want to test and make sure that it's actually operating correctly, and then look for any gaps. And then a lot of times, customers might have some unique side cases of maybe integrations of certain
Mm.
applications or such that you also have to test as far as the migration process, just to make sure that it's set up and configured properly on the destination tenant.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a lot. I remember in some of the ones we've done of just making sure each workload has at least proven its ability to
Mhm.
be migrated to some extent,
Mhm.
and all of those important pieces. Although
Mhm.
even some of the more difficult things like Power Automate or
Mhm.
Forms or some of those more difficult or incapable of a tool, right? That
Mhm.
can't just lift and shift it for you, of making sure that's happening,
Mhm.
or at least it will wind up close to.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and testing, functional testing is not going to be exactly like production level migration. So
Right.
that's why too, when we're doing testing, we want to have the type of data as close to production as possible, just so that, again, from a tooling perspective, if it does have any issues, you can get ahead of that, and then make sure that you accommodate that for that in the production actual cutover.
Yeah, and I mean that leads us right. How and where can testing actually impact the migration
Mhm.
process or the plans even?
Mhm. Yeah, well, and that, like I said, it's a great segue, right? So, it's one thing just to, create some test sites or mailboxes or whatnot, put a little clean data in there, and then do the migration. Everything looks good. And then when you get into the production side of the house, all of a sudden things are failing, not quite. So yeah, that's certainly one of the most critical pieces, is to make sure that you're using either factual data, or sometimes a lot of customers have either user accounts or sites that are no longer being used but still have legacy data. So maybe you can do some testing with, those types of accounts or
Right.
that type of data as well, to again get what it's really going to look like from a migration perspective. So as close as possible. I know it's never going to be perfect, and you're always going to encounter issues in production. It's just it's a migration. It's just it's just the nature of those. It's just the nature of migration. So
Yeah, I also like the champions too of who is, I always call it IT friendly, right? Who doesn't mind helping out IT or is tech savvy enough? Hey, go log in and poke at it, right? What's something that you usually handle breaking, right? That one person in every department who's that IT guy
Yep.
of that department, of giving them that early access to say, poke at it in a way that it might break, and let us know if it works as much as you can, right? Within the
Right.
limits, to your point, of functional testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note of me making the final note instead of my guest, that is unfortunately all of our time. Joe, thank you once again for joining. If you have any questions, all of our contact is below. Please feel free to reach out. Until then, Joe, the final episode is upcoming, so cheers,
Oh
sir.
boy. All right, I'll have to find something good to drink for that one.
Now you're setting the standards high.
That's right.
Take care.